Israel versus Palestine. Which side are you on? Well, here's the thing. It's not about sides. What it is, though, is an opportunity for you to equip yourself with critical knowledge so that you better understand how the world truly works. And yes, you will feel emotional at certain points in the story, but I implore you to channel that energy into something where you can positively contribute. It may not be in regards to this particular crisis or issue right now, but I promise you, the time will come where you can positively contribute to a cause. Well, now that I've set the tone, here's what we're going to be discussing. We're first going to look at the history of this territory. What's actually happened here before? We're then going to look at the concept of nationalism and what it looks like, what it means when it becomes radicalized, how it affects other people. And then thirdly, we're going to look at which states are allied to which states in the situation, what those relationships mean, but also how they impact you as a citizen as well as a future leader. Are you ready to have the chat? So many empires have actually had claim over this territory over thousands of years, like the Egyptian Empire, the Babylonians, even the Roman Empire once had their hands over this territory during a certain period of time. Now, we know it today as Israel-Palestine, but it's been called Canaan or Canaan, the Promised Land, as well as Judea and Samaria. It's making sense now, right? It's clicking. You've heard these names before in holy scriptures, and so you understand the stories and what they all link to. Now, this is a very long history and it's pretty intricate. There's a lot of people that play a role, so I'm going to try skip over it and summarize it for you guys, but I will refer you to a great source. So here's our first source, the 4 Critical Thinkers YouTube page. They break down this whole history and I really would implore you guys to go and check it out. But let's go to World War I because that is a very important event in this whole Israel-Palestine conflict. So at this moment in time, the Middle East, well, World War I is what created the Middle East as we know it. And at this point in time, the Jews want the area Palestine, and so does the Arab world. And they also want the surrounding areas. Now, the Ottoman Empire at the moment has power over Palestine. This is the Turks' Ottoman Empire. That's what you'd usually hear it being referred to as. They are part of the Central Powers, and they're against the Allied powers. The Allied powers are Japan, Italy, Britain, as well as France. That's the last one. And so what they decide to do, Britain, the Allied powers, is they align themselves with the Arabs against the Turks, against the Ottoman Empire. And like I said, I'm going to try and summarize it, but essentially, this is where things start getting a bit dodgy. In fact, this is something that I feel people aren't realizing, aren't paying that much attention to. It's the role that the British Empire has to play. Britain, you dodgy dealer. Because fast forward to World War II, Britain starts to broker deals with the Ottoman Empire, the Arab world, as well as Israel, or what is to be Israel. And they all get promised this territory, which is weird, right? Because who said that they have a say over it in the first place? Well, there's a whole bunch of treaties that are signed, which, like I said, check out that resource. It's fun because it's a video format. But we come with Resolution 181, which divides the territory, which is originally Palestine, into an Arab versus a Jewish area, right? And it's not an equal divide like straight down the middle or down that way. It's sort of like a weird jigsaw puzzle. So the Arab world is like that, and the Jewish world is like that. And obviously, they're not happy about this. And so what they decide to do is to have a war. Cue the first conflict that happens between these people. I'm not going to go into it too much. Like I said, I'm going to keep saying it's a long history, but essentially Israel ends up winning over most of the territory in that war. According to international law, though, it wasn't lawful. It wasn't a lawful situation. However, they have that issue. And that's where all of this conflict starts. This is what happens in 1948. So let's get to part 2. Fun fact, Israel became an independent state, that was in 1948, in the same year that the apartheid regime was formalized in South Africa and legislature was created around it and everything. Don't you think that's funny? Well, I'll explain the relationship just now, but first, let's understand the term nationalism. This is the identification with one's own nation and support of its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. Now, this Zionism was a form or is a form of Jewish nationalism. And in this context, it did sort of serve as a form of detriment to the Palestinian people that were already occupying this area. I'm not going to get into all of the gruesome conflicts and wars and what exactly happened, because I think the media has fed you guys enough of that. But I just want to create a link or sort of show you how similar this was to Afrikaner nationalism, which happened at the same time in South Africa. And you see what the apartheid regime did to indigenous African peoples in South Africa, and how for such a long time the Western world wasn't really speaking out against what was happening in South Africa. In fact, some may have supported it. Only much later on, closer to 1991, just before that obviously, did sanctions begin to be put on South Africa because of the unlawful and inhumane apartheid regime. I'm seeing so much of that in what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now. What's even more funny is that the apartheid states, or essentially Afrikaner nationalism, this is very much more loose, and I'm swaying a little bit away from academia right now. But it's an interesting observation that I made, which was originally a few people, I'm not going to name them right now, but within this movement of Afrikaner nationalism and the leadership within the apartheid regime, they were very much more on the side of the Nazis. And you see how later on, apartheid South Africa builds a relationship with Israel, and they start to become intimate, especially with the relations that they have with one another. And obviously, Israel is not condemning the apartheid regime. Now, this leads me into the third part, because you have to pay attention to who's saying what and who's making what relationships with who. I mean, I will use the example of South Africa's relationship with Israel. As soon as South Africa became a newly democratic South Africa, you see how our own foreign relations with Israel are not the same as they were with the apartheid South Africa's foreign affairs. And this is because it's two different leaders. And if you look at the time, the ANC was actually on the side of Palestine. And that makes you think about what's happening in the country right now as well.